All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody, to the Space Commune live stream. We have a very special guest this evening. We have Mr. Caleb Maupin. Caleb, how's it going? How are you doing this on this freezing, frigid New York evening?
I'm great. I'm really glad to be here. I've been offline for the past week. My throat's been a little sore, but now I'm back at full speed. I've been reporting on the Chinese weather balloon apocalypse all day, and now I'm ready to stream with my friend Fox. So, how you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. I'm a little cold, but tomorrow's supposed to warm up, so that's good. The weather, right? It's this damn climate change.
Yeah.
um, But yeah, so I had an interesting week this week because the leftists, they've really been coming after me for some artwork that I was so happy to create for you, for a book that you just put out, or that yeah, you just put this book out, right? People can find it on Amazon. A book that you wrote all by yourself. The whole thing is original content. No, it's actually it's a very well known book, right? That you are republishing with your own intro, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's Socialism, Scientific, and Utopian by Friedrich Engels.
Yes. Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Friedrich Engels is considered one of the most important books in the history of Marxism. Engels was Marx's close collaborator. The problem with Karl Marx is that he wrote in a very esoteric way. He wrote very polemical, long drawn out works. But Engels' English was a language he was much more familiar with. He wrote in English, and he was kind of a more popular writer. So he actually wrote this much longer book, and we can talk about this later, called Anti-Dühring, that kind of laid out Marx's views in polemic with another socialist thinker named Dühring. And so then they had the idea to compress it into a really short pamphlet called Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. It's one of the most important Marxist texts in the history of the movement, really. I mean, it is a pamphlet. It's one of the first things I read when I came around. And the concepts in it are considered like Marxism 101. It's like just kind of basic about the Marxist movement, where it came from, why Marxism is separate from other forms of socialism that preceded it. If you read it, you would understand why the cover makes a lot of sense. The problem is all the people hating on it haven't read it.
That's what they
I don't know
accuse.
why you
That's what
had
they
to.
accuse us of, though. They say, "Oh, you
I know.
you haven't read the book." So why would they say this? What?
Well, I mean, the burning cross that you put on there, the screed, the words "death to the Jews" written out, the swastika and all the crowds of people hailing. I think that's what put people off about the cover. I'm just kidding, but no, in seriousness, look at this cover. It's a beautiful cover, right? And it's just like I guess. Why don't you explain the cover, and then I'll explain how it relates to the book.
Yeah. So I mean, oh, I zoomed it in way too much. Here we go. Zoom it out so we can see it. So when you asked me, you approached me to design a cover, and I was like, "That's awesome. I would love to." I've been doing graphic design for, you know, 15 years plus, 20 years. I lost track. It's been my entire career. No one's ever asked me to design a book cover, so I was stoked to do that. Especially for a book that I think is awesome, and I think you're awesome, and the cause is awesome. So I was stoked to do this, and I asked you, what do you have in mind for this, right? What do you have in mind for this? And you said something kind of sci-fi, something with like a city skyline, um, and I thought that was really cool. And I remember from the cover of that I designed for our podcast interview that we did, what, almost 2 years ago at this point. I used sort of like the Earth with hands shaking, and like a Brotherhood of Humanity was the title of the track, and I wanted to use that again, right? This idea of space. I think you even suggested space, and of course we're space commune. So this idea of just looking to the future. And also, I was really inspired by if you look at socialist realism art, and artwork and graphic design that was coming out of the Soviet Union, during the early 20th century, mid 20th century. It was all like very positive, and it all revolved around like regular people looking aspirational, right? Using combining like technology and looking aspirationally into the future. And I thought that was such a cool idea, but I didn't want to just completely copy that because I think there's too much going on with um, leftists just get into this historical reenactment, right? It's basically historical reenactment LARPing. What we want is we want this to be cool to people who exist now and get people inspired now. And so I thought this was a cool cover, cool idea that you had. That would attract regular people, right? That would inspire regular people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting because the two genres, science fiction and fantasy, many people have said that's in a way, I mean, it's a huge oversimplification. That's communism and fascism, right? Because communism is this very, very future-oriented, progressive ideology that says we're going to march into the future, we're going to get rid of all class divisions, we're going to create a society in which there is no inequality, a stateless, classless world. And fascism says we're going to restore the glorious past. We're going to bring back the honor and the social hierarchies and the dignity of the past that we've lost. Fascism is the ultimate conservatism. Communism is the ultimate leftism or progressivism. And that's a simplistic way of understanding that. Now, of course, there are exceptions within both genres. You can think of there are obviously sci-fi books that are reactionary. I think Robert Heinlein was known to be quite libertarian and backward looking, in his work, Starship Troopers, et cetera, is a glorification of the British Empire and their reactionary, aspects. And there are some progressive fantasy novels that you can think of. But overwhelmingly, if you look at the aesthetic in the 1930s, the communist movement was all about marching into the future. And the fascist movement was all about glorifying the past. Now, that doesn't mean that, different movements can't take on different images and messaging at different times. But ultimately, the book, Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, it's in 3 parts. And if you've ever read it, it is really important. You can read my introduction. I wrote a long introduction, 65 pages, kind of putting it in present context. But the book itself, right? The classic work of Engels, it's in 3 parts. The first part is about utopian socialism. And it's about how when capitalism first emerged from feudalism, you had all these thinkers like Robert Owen and Henry Saint-Simon and others who just said this isn't right. Poverty is not good. There's inequality between the worker and the capitalist. Maybe we should start some worker cooperatives. Maybe we should do some charity work. Maybe we should build a model city where everyone's taken care of, something like that. But their opposition to capitalism was purely on a moral stance. They're like, this is wrong. And it was usually, very, very religious in nature. And it was utopian socialism. And many people read that first chapter as saying, well, Engels is polemicizing against these people. And he's actually not. He's praising them. And he's saying, look, these are good people that saw injustice. They saw that the brave new world of capitalism wasn't offering a good society, and they tried to do their best to do something about it. But the problem was they didn't have science. That was the problem. It was based on this moralistic appeal. So then the next chapter is on dialectics, and it's all about the history of philosophy and the fight between materialists and idealists, and how Marx combined the Greek materialists and their belief that all that exists is matter. And he combined that with the Hegelian concept of the dialectic, that history is driven forward by contradiction. And he developed a philosophy called dialectical materialism. And that is the second chapter. And then the final chapter is called historical materialism. And it's about why is it we went from hunter-gatherer civilization to slavery, to feudalism, to capitalism, and why capitalism will inevitably give birth to socialism, a higher mode of production that will eventually lead to the higher stage of communism, the ultimate goal of a stateless, classless world. And it's 3 parts. It's like a Beethoven symphony. It's a beautiful work of writing that really every Marxist should read because it's all laid out there. And if you read it, and this is what drives the fake left so angry, if you read it, there is no way that, especially that 3rd chapter where he's laying out what scientific socialism is, there is no way you can believe in degrowth and agree with that chapter. It is all about how capitalism is holding back human progress. It's creating a crisis of overproduction, and it's leading to an economy that cannot sustain constant growth. And so you need to have socialism. And he lays that out. And when he describes the problem with capitalism, this is what he writes. He writes, the extension of the markets cannot keep pace with the extension of production. The collision becomes inevitable, as this cannot produce any real solution so long as it does not break in pieces the capitalist mode of production. the collisions become periodic. The capitalist production has begotten yet another vicious circle. As a matter of fact, since 1825, when the first general crisis broke out, the whole industrial and commercial world, production and exchange among all civilized people and their more or less barbaric hangers-on are thrown out of joint about every 10 years. Commerce is at a standstill. The markets are glutted. Products accumulate as multitudinous as they are unsaleable. Hard cash disappears, credit vanishes, factories are closed, and the mass of workers are in want of the means of subsistence because they have produced too much of means of subsistence. Bankruptcy follows upon bankruptcy, execution upon execution. The stagnation lasts for years. Productive forces and products are wasted and destroyed wholesale until the accumulated mass of commodities finally filter off, more or less depreciated in value, until production and exchange gradually begin to move again. He's describing how the problem is that under capitalism, you can't have growth for a long period because of this built-in irrationality and instability. He talks about what he calls the anarchy of production. And then he lays out what the solution is. And he spells that out in language that would drive, the bikoids and the Earth First kind of people up the wall. He says he's talking about the means of production. Once their nature is understood, they can, in the hands of the producers, begin working together and be transformed from master demons into willing servants. The difference is that between the destructive force of electricity and lightning in a storm and electricity under the command of the telegraph and in the voltaic arc, the difference between a conflagration and fire working in the service of man. With this recognition, at last, the real nature of the productive forces of today, the social anarchy of production, gives place to a real social regulation of production on a definite plan, according to the needs of the community and of each individual. The proletariat seizes public power and by means of this transforms the socialized production, slipping from the hands of the bourgeoisie into public property. And by this act, the proletariat frees the means of production from the character of capital they've thus forborne and gives their socialized character freedom to work itself out. Socialized production upon a predetermined plan becomes henceforth possible. The development of production makes the existence of different social classes an anachronism. In proportion as anarchy and social production vanishes, the authority of the state dies out. Man, at last the master of his own form of social organization, becomes at this time the lord over nature, his own master, free. With seizing the means of production by society, production of commodities is done away with, and simultaneously the mastery of the product over the producer. Anarchy in social production is replaced by systemic definite organization. The struggle for individual existence disappears, and then for the first time, man, in a certain sense, is finally marked off from the rest of the animal kingdom and emerges from mere animal conditions to existence into really human ones. The laws of his own social action, hitherto standing face to face with the laws of nature, are foreign to and dominating him, will then be used to full understanding and so mastered by him. Man's own social organization, hitherto confronting him as a necessity imposed on him by nature and history, now becomes the result of his own free action. The extraneous objective forces that have hitherto governed history pass from the control of into the control of man himself. Only from that time on will man himself more and more consciously make his own history. Only from that time will the social causes set in movement by him in the main and in constant growing measure, the result intended by him. It is the ascent of man from the kingdom of necessity to the kingdom of freedom. That's what he's describing. He's describing a society, a futuristic, post-scarcity society created by rational control over the means of production. He's saying that under capitalism, production is like lightning. But under socialism, production is like a telegraph, or it's like a power plant. It's like, the difference between electricity and harnessing electricity for the good of mankind. Lightning, wild electricity versus, rationally controlled, mechanized electricity. That's what he's describing. The process of socialism is harnessing the power of nature, harnessing the power of production, and using it rationally to build up a society of vast abundance. So it's very much a high-tech futurist piece of writing, and that's why I think the piece of writing that we did is very, very appropriate. There's nothing in Engels' book that would say that he wants people to be poorer.